and most fun news debate on TV where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news debate and analysis here on GB News with me, Darren McCaffrey. And here's what's coming up between now and 4 o'clock. We're live in Westminster. The Prime Minister says that he wants to draw a line under yesterday's vote to move on and to talk about the issues that matter to the public. But can the Prime Minister do that, given that 4 out of 10 of his own MPs no longer have confidence in his leadership? We'll be hearing from the Foreign Secretary, who's been speaking in the last hour. Also coming up, the State of the Union. Not the union within the Conservative Party, but within the UK. Related to, of course, to Scottish MPs, Conservative MPs. 4 out of 6 voted against the Prime Minister yesterday. Where does that leave the Conservative Party, the Conservative and Unionist Party? And also, is Brexit in peril? Those suggestions that if Boris Johnson is booted out of number 10, that Brexit itself might be in trouble. We'll be hearing the latest political reaction to that. And we'll be joined by live guests here on College Green outside the Houses of Parliament. All that and so much more. Do get in touch as always. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. What do you think of yesterday's result? Should the Prime Minister remain in posts? We've got lots coming up over the next hour, but first, let's head back to the studio for the latest news headlines at the top of the hour, and Rosie writes.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister is asking his cabinet to find further ways to cut some of the costs the public and businesses are facing, as he vowed to deliver on what matters to the British people. He said the government's focusing on COVID recovery, tackling inflation and rising energy prices. Boris Johnson thanked his ministers for their support during last night's vote, where 148 Conservative MPs said they didn't have confidence in the Prime Minister.
Thank you, by the way, everybody, for all your good work yesterday, because which was a very important day, because we were able now to draw a line under the issues that our opponents want to talk about, and we're able to get on with talking about what I think the people of this country want us to talk about, which is what we are doing to help them.
Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says now is the time to get behind the Prime Minister.
Well, we had a vote yesterday. The Prime Minister won a clear majority. It's time to draw a line, move forward and focus on what people want us to be talking about: housing, childcare, delivering on lower taxes.
Opening an Opposition Day debate on standards in public life, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, told MPs many people cannot move on from Partygate without the Prime Minister standing down.
But the conduct of this Prime Minister undermines those values, rigging the rules that he himself is under investigation for breaching, downgrading standards, debasing the principles of public life before our very eyes. There's nothing decent about the way that he has acted.
Polling expert Sir John Curtis told us Boris Johnson has lost public support.
Yesterday morning, in the wake of the announcement that the vote was going to take place, they found 60% of people saying that the Prime Minister should resign. That's exactly the same as what the polls were saying in the immediate wake of the publication of the Sue Gray report.
In some other news now, the co-founder of the far-right group National Action has been jailed for 8.5 years. Alex Davies was found guilty last month of being a member of the organisation after it was banned in 2016. Davies formed the neo-Nazi group while he was attending Warwick University in 2013. 3/4 of UK consumers say the cost of food is a major concern. The Food Standards Agency says the number of people using a food bank has jumped from 1 in 10 to nearly 1 in 6 since last year. They say 22% of those surveyed in March skipped meals because they didn't have enough money to buy food. The UK's farming minister says allegations that Russia is stealing grain from Ukraine are serious and must be investigated. Russia says Ukraine must have its ships vetted by the Russian military before it can export grain. The country has seized large parts of Ukraine's coast, blocking farm exports and driving up the price. International food agencies have warned that without Ukraine's grain, the effect on global security for our food could be catastrophic. Major General Chip Chapman told us Russia's using it as a political tool.
They are weaponising grain supplies as a means of trying to get leverage over Ukraine in the international community ultimately. And we must, in my view, we've got to hold the line and support Ukraine and not weaken in a sort of appeasing moment saying you've got to go for a ceasefire, Ukraine, because food prices are going up.
The sister of a British journalist has pleaded with Brazilian authorities to do all they can to find him. Dom Phillips was last seen early on Sunday on his way to Brazil's largest indigenous territory. The 57-year-old was heading there for research for a book alongside a Brazilian advisor, but the pair didn't make it to their destination. The Brazilian Navy says it sent out a search and rescue team and would deploy a helicopter today. The government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, has received an honour at Buckingham Palace for helping to lead the UK's battle against coronavirus. Sir Patrick was originally knighted in the 2019 New Year Honours List. He's now become a Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath. It's an order which recognises the work of senior military officials and civil servants. You're up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing and Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. It is coming up to 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're live outside the Houses of Parliament. We're on TV, online, of course, on your DAB digital radios as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company. There is only one big political story, and that is the fallout from yesterday's dramatic day of politics and the vote last night in which Boris Johnson managed to win the vote of confidence amongst his own MPs. 211 Conservative MPs backed him, 148 said they did not have confidence. It's the size of that second figure, though, that is of concern to Downing Street and indeed to Boris Johnson. Today, the Prime Minister insisted at a cabinet meeting he wanted the government and the party and his MPs to draw a line under the issue of Partygate and that confidence vote to move on and to focus on the key issues facing the country, such as the economy, housing and the cost of living crisis. But frankly, even though some of his opponents think a line does need to be drawn, many others are not convinced. They're looking down the line to by-elections in a couple of weeks' time in Wakefield and in Tiverton, and also looking at the Privileges Committee report into whether the Prime Minister misled MPs, whether he lied to MPs, which is due to report later this year. There is a sense that the Prime Minister is far from out of the danger zone. Lord Hague, William Hague, the former Foreign Secretary, today saying that the damage done to his premiership is severe, though others, including Andrea Leadsom, who of course rebelled and voted against the Prime Minister, now says that the vote was won comprehensively and that the party should move on. We're going to have all the latest political reaction here from Westminster over the next hour, but in the last couple of minutes or so, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has been speaking to MPs inside Parliament, and this is her reaction to essentially saying, everyone, we need to move on.
First of all, Foreign Secretary, has the Prime Minister's authority been undermined by yesterday's vote?
Well, what we saw in yesterday's vote was a clear majority in support of the Prime Minister. And what we've been doing today is getting on with the business of government. We've had a cabinet meeting. We're working on making housing more affordable, making childcare more affordable, lowering taxes. And that's what the public want us to be doing.
On the Prime Minister's authority, though, if we go back to that first question, has it been undermined?
As I've said, the Prime Minister remains committed to our agenda. He's already delivered on Brexit. He's delivered on COVID, on helping the economy recover. He's delivered on supporting Ukraine in the face of appalling Russian aggression. And that's what the Cabinet want him to carry on doing, and that's what the country wants him to carry on doing.
So what's your message to those 148 of your colleagues who declared they had no confidence in the party leader?
My message is we had a vote yesterday. There was a clear result in that vote. Now is the time to get behind the Prime Minister to deliver on what people in Britain want to see, which is dealing with issues around the affordability of housing, the affordability of childcare, getting taxes down, getting our economy going. That's what people want to see.
And what does this mean with regard to your ambitions, potentially, for the leadership of the party?
My 100% focus is on my role as Foreign Secretary. There's a lot to do. We need to carry on supporting Ukraine. We need to make sure that Russia is driven out of Ukraine and that we get successful peace for Ukraine. We need to help them rebuild. I'm also working on the Northern Ireland Protocol, making sure we restore the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, bringing forward legislation, and I can assure you that is taking up all of my time.
Should colleagues feel able to continue to criticise the Prime Minister?
Well, we had a vote yesterday. The Prime Minister won a clear majority. It's time to draw a line, move forward and focus on what people want us to be talking about: housing, childcare, delivering on lower taxes.
Now, you mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol. Are you willing to risk a trade war with the European Union to sort it all out?
What we want to do is create clear green lanes for goods flowing into Northern Ireland and a red lane for goods flowing into the EU. That will protect the EU single market at the same time as enabling goods to flow freely around the UK. That's a win-win for both the people of Northern Ireland and protecting the EU single market.
And you also mentioned bringing taxes down. Lord Frost today has said that the national insurance increase should be reversed, that the corporation tax rise should not go ahead. Do you agree?
Well, today at Cabinet, the Prime Minister confirmed that he wants to see taxes come down. That is very, very important. We need to make sure people have more money in their pockets. We need to get the economy going, and the way to do that is lowering taxes. Thank you.
There you go, that's Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, speaking to reporters inside Parliament within the last hour or so. Let's go live to Downing Street now, speak to our political correspondent, Tom Holwood, who's there for us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Tom. Fascinating, isn't it, listening to Liz Truss there at the end, and indeed the Prime Minister, but more notably Lord Frost today, calling for this kind of policy blitzkrieg, if you like, that they want to see substantial changes on this issue, not least of all of taxation. We know there's a big speech on Thursday, don't we, with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Are we likely to see lots of substantial changes in the days and weeks to come, do you reckon?
Well, we're expecting that speech with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to set out a new economic vision, potentially into next week, but maybe the end of this week. We'll have to wait and see. However, it is interesting to hear the direction of travel in the rhetoric, if not the policy so far. Certainly the Prime Minister saying that he wanted to be a tax-cutting Prime Minister. Liz Truss, someone who we know has privately been opposing many of the tax rises that have gone on in the last couple of years. Now, they're talking in the generality of getting taxes down. However, Lord Frost, someone who, of course, left Cabinet several months ago, is talking in the specific. He's saying he wants the government to cancel the corporation tax hike and reverse the national insurance tax rise as well. Liz Truss clearly responding there to those 2 points in the generality, but no doubt there'll be some pretty fervent battles around the Cabinet table. There are those who care more about keeping the deficit down, and there are those around the Cabinet table who care more about keeping taxes down and spurring growth, and in the medium to long term getting the deficit down that way. I think one of the big watchwords of the next few months is growth. What is the government going to do to raise the growth prospects of this country? Because it's been fairly sclerotic in the last few quarters, and indeed the projections of this year and next do not look particularly healthy. So there are some big challenges, and I think if we're to look at the context in which MPs voted just yesterday, yes, of course, Partygate became a catalyst for this disquiet, but I think it would be wrong to assume that it was beer or cake or wine or cheese that was the big driving force behind the wide dissent across different elements of the party. I think think that just opened the door to a general malaise where people have been thinking, particularly backbench Conservative MPs have been thinking that this is a government that is lacking in direction, that has been too pushed around by various events, too willing to U-turn, too willing to raise taxes, to follow the lead of the opposition, of interest groups, or indeed of the media. This is a government that has been adrift to some extent, and clearly the implication of what has been said from within the cabinet room, what we have learnt that was said this morning, and indeed the public words of the Prime Minister yesterday, is that he believes there's a job to do potentially to get that ship back on course. So will the Conservative Party be able to sort of regroup and move forward, or will the Prime Minister still be dragged down and indeed tripped up by future events, not least those two by-elections on the 23rd of June?
Yeah, and just finally, Tom, what is the move within the party today? We heard from Andrew Leadson essentially saying that we needed to move on, or the Conservative MPs needed to move on, though others, William Hague, saying that this is kind of mortally damaging, just the scale of the rebellion. What are you hearing from the MPs you've spoken to?
Do you know, it's so interesting. I've been chasing after a lot of those MPs who yesterday were very publicly critical of the Prime Minister, seeing if they were willing to go on the record today. And I think there's a bit of a subdued attitude around many of the rebels yesterday. There are people who are now wanting to potentially keep their powder dry. Maybe rebels thinking they went too soon. People still clearly not particularly happy with the Prime Minister, but not wanting to continue this barrage against him at this point in time. No doubt there will be future problems for the Prime Minister, maybe another push for a confidence vote in the future, but in the immediate days and weeks it looks like rebels want to keep their powder relatively dry.
Tom, as always, thank you very much. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent joins from Downing Street. Thank you, Tom. Well, delighted to say joining me outside the Houses of Parliament is the Conservative MP for Lichfield, someone who voted for the Prime Minister, who confidence in Boris Johnson yesterday. That is Michael Fabricant. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Were you surprised by the scale of the rebellion?
I was surprised it wasn't worse.
Really?
If I'm honest with you.
Well, if it had been any worse, he would have been gone today.
Oh no, there's a sufficient margin that it wasn't that bad. But you know, I said on Patrick Christie's show yesterday that I thought about 2/3 would vote for him, but secretly, deep down, you know, I thought, no, it's going to be a lot closer. And it wasn't as close as I feared. So there's a sufficient margin there.
Do you think his authority's been damaged, though? Do you think it's been followed?
Without any question. If any Prime Minister has a vote of no confidence against them, it is going to damage, you know, some of their
ability to govern.
Well, I wouldn't say ability to govern, but it certainly does damage them ever so slightly. But we've got to move on, as everybody says. Now, it's easy to say. Prime Minister was saying it, others were saying it. Philip Davis on GBNews was saying it earlier today. But what is the important thing is for the government to actually now come up with proposals and ideas and momentum, because with the momentum you then move everything on.
And what are they? Do you agree with Lord Frost, for example, the national insurance rise should be scrapped?
Well, there are lots of things that could be done. It could be that. There are other things you can do in compensation. Whether we should be doing quite the zero green effort that we're trying to do at the moment. You know, it was almost our misfortune. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but it was almost our misfortune that we ended up chairing the COP meetings in Glasgow. I almost wonder whether, you know, we should be saying to ourselves, come on, we've just come out of a COVID crisis. It's damaged the world economy. The war in Ukraine is damaging the economy of the world still further and having a real impact here on the United Kingdom, as it is in other European countries. Perhaps it's a time to look again at some of the policies that we have adopted at a time when the economy was not being battered by these world events.
No, in many ways, Tom was just suggesting, though, that actually in some ways Partygate was the catalyst, if you like, for the vote, but actually in the end it was much more about politics and issues. But is it, though? Isn't it for lots of Conservative MPs? It's actually about Boris Johnson's personality. They don't trust him anymore.
No, I don't think it's that.
Well, but there are lots of MPs who do think he has misled Parliament. Lots of Conservative MPs.
No, I think they're saying that. I think they're talking about Partygate. But I think Tom Harwood is actually spot on, he usually is. I think a lot of it had to do with those people who didn't support Brexit and are now trying to get some sort of reversal. Tobias Ellwood keeps on going on about our joining the single market, which would put us under the auspices of the European Court of Justice and would mean that we'd have to obey rules from Brussels again, so I wouldn't call that a Brexit. Then you've got others who are saying, well, actually, we don't agree with Channel 4 sell-off. We don't agree with the Rwanda policy to stop and deter people from crossing the channel illegally. A lot of it has to do with policy. And you know, the Conservative Party is a broad church, and I respect the views of most of my colleagues. Some of them, however, you know, some of them were ministers and then find they're no longer ministers, so are resentful. Others were never even ministers and have been overlooked. So they're resentful. I'm not sure I respect them quite so much.
But isn't it extraordinary, though, that, you know, there's 130, 140 or something on the payroll? I mean, the majority of backbenchers, the majority of your colleagues on those backbenchers almost certainly voted to get rid of him.
Well, you don't know that some of the ministers didn't vote to get rid of him. We don't know. It was a secret ballot.
Isn't Lord Hague right, though, when he says that Boris Johnson may well be at the steering wheel, but the car's now got 2 flat tires and he's just not going to make it to the end? That in the end, he's now so politically wounded that he's not going to last the course.
You know what? I love William Hague, but there's nothing worse than ex-prime ministers who turn their hand to journalism. No, he wasn't. You're right. Yeah. So even more resentful, maybe. Good point, Darren. So either because he wasn't prime minister, or because he's just trying to make a good story in journalism. You know, there's nothing more irritating than people who haven't quite made it telling people who have made it and are successes how to run a government. It's like former chief whips who tell the current chief whip, I would have done your job better, and there are plenty of them around.
Michael Fabricant, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Then be there, because I never before Litchfield. Thank you, Michael. OK, you're watching GB News. We're going to take a quick break here for the time being. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, though, we'll be getting the reaction from Wakefield, well, there's that crucial by-election in just a couple of weeks' time. Plus, what are the political betting odds about all of this? Can Boris survive? And if he doesn't, who's likely to succeed him? That and much more live from outside Parliament. Just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back. Do get in touch, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews, whether you agree with people like Michael Fabricant or disagree, whether you think the Prime Minister will or should last the course of the next general election. Maybe it should be up to the public to decide on whether he remains as Prime Minister, not just Conservative MPs, or whether you think actually he should go and go soon. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those a little later on in the programme. But first, let's turn to Wakefield, because in a couple of weeks' time there's going to be a crucial by-election there. It was a Conservative seat at the last election, having been Labour for decades before that. But the expectation is that Labour will regain the seat on June 23rd. Let's speak to Anna Riley, our reporter who's in the constituency for us this afternoon. Very good afternoon to you, Anna. You've been out and about talking to people, gauging the political moods.
Good afternoon, Darren. Yes, I have. I was here last week as well, and the mood is largely unchanged. Even though Boris Johnson has won this confidence vote, people are still feeling the same. That is, the majority of people are telling me that they will be voting for Labour in this by-election, or that they won't be voting at all. They'll be abstaining because they just feel unpolitically motivated. And I've been out speaking to people today, finding out what they think to Boris Johnson, if this confidence vote has affected how they feel about him, and this is what they had to say.
I think the thing is, like, whatever he's done and how he's been blamed for these party and things like that, get it out of the road, get it done with. Don't concern me one little bit, really.
No, not really. I don't think he's bad, really. But I've always been a Labour man, but Starmer's not the man for me.
Before the start, I know they won't get him out because everybody likes him. You know what I mean? I know he's been an idiot, like, and he's been fine and all that. But I know last night they won't get him out because he's a likeable fella, isn't he? You know what I mean? And everybody's tried to put him down. And the more people try to put him down, the more he bounces back, doesn't he? So he'll be there till the end of his reign. You know what I mean?
Has the confidence vote changed your perception?
No.
And why not?
Because he's all right.
What do you think to Boris Johnson?
Good.
I do believe in giving second chances, you know what I mean, but I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Has it changed anything, this vote of confidence in his party?
No.
And why not?
I just think he's an idiot.
So a real mixture of opinions there, whether people like or loathe Boris Johnson. This confidence vote doesn't seem to have changed anything here in Wakefield, and June the 23rd, that crucial by-election date, certainly one to watch out for and see what happens here on the ground.
Indeed, and we'll have, of course, full coverage in the lead up to that by-election in Wakefield, and indeed the other one down in Tiverton over the coming weeks. Anna, as always, thank you very much indeed. Anna Riley there, joining us from Yorkshire. There are 15 candidates standing in the Wakefield by-election. Let me just talk you through who they are. They are Nadeem Ahmed for the Conservatives, Akif Akbar, who's an independent, Paul Bickerdike from the Christian People's Alliance, Mike Dodgen of the Freedom Alliance, Jadar Franson, who's an independent, Jordan Gaskell for the UK Independence Party, David Hurdson of the Yorkshire Party, Therese Hurst from the English Democrats, Christopher Jones from the Northern Independence Party, Simon Lightwood for Labour, Jamie Needle for the Liberal Democrats, Ash Ruth of the Green Party, Ashley Simon from Britain First, Sir Archibald Stanton Earl Eaton from the Monster Raving Looney Party, and Chris Walsh from Reform UK. Now, What are the betting markets saying about all this political news at the moment? How many bets were put on yesterday? Will the Prime Minister stay in post? Who potentially could take over from him? Let's speak to Matthew Shedrick. He's from S Markets and joins us down the line now. Matthew, very good afternoon to you. First of all, were there many bets put on yesterday? There seemed to be, at least on social media, lots of people trying to guess what the numbers would be. Did people go as far as putting some money behind it?
Hi, Darren. Yeah, it was a busy day for political bookmakers yesterday. Very, very lively indeed. Actually, the odds started off about 50-50 as to whether Boris would survive or not when Graham Brady announced the vote was going to happen, but that very quickly moved to sort of 80% chance he'd win, so there was no surprise there. And actually, the balance of money on the markets we had on the number of rebels did indicate there would be somewhere around 142 was our midpoint, so 148 was the actual total, so punters got it pretty much spot on.
And Matthew, what about the odds of the Prime Minister not just surviving yesterday, but beyond that in the months to come? I mean, are there people betting on whether he'll be around to lead the Conservative Party into the next general election?
There are indeed, yes, very lively betting market. Well, at the moment, the odds at markets say there's about a 1 in 3 chance it will still be in charge by the time the general election comes round. But not necessarily anytime soon. We think it's more likely than not he'll make it through this year at least. Of course, partly because it's quite hard to get rid of him now he's won this confidence vote. Unless, of course, they change the rules. We think there's about a 25% chance that will happen, and there will, in fact, be another confidence vote before the year's out.
And if there is another confidence vote and he does lose the next one, of course, there's always continued speculation about who could take over. I mean, my political reckoning is that one of the reasons he is relatively safe for the time being is that there is no obvious successor. What do people think when they're betting? Who are their favourites potentially to take over the reins of power?
Yeah, I think it's spot on, Darren. It's a completely wide open race. Now, just looking at the live prices at Smarkets,
we think we may well have just lost Matthew there, who was talking through, of course, the betting markets and who potentially could take over. I'm sure the names he was going to suggest were people like Liz Truss, who we heard a little bit earlier on as the Foreign Secretary, but also Nadhim Zahawi. Of course, the Education Secretary is much talked about. Rishi Sunak, is he still potentially in the running? And from outside the Cabinet, people like Jeremy Hunt and Tom Tugendhat are talked about much as well. So we'll be hearing, hopefully from Matthew, maybe a little later on in the programme. We just lost the connection to him. OK, well, we're going to pause there on the briefing. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be getting more political reaction live from outside the Houses of Parliament. And we'll be hearing what you've got to say as well. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Can the Prime Minister survive in the medium to longer term? But before all of that, let's go back over to the studio in London for the latest news headlines with Rosie again.
It's 3:32. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister says his fundamental instinct now is to cut taxes to deliver economic growth. Boris Johnson told his cabinet the government now focus on what matters to the public. The Prime Minister thanked them for their support after he saw off a vote of confidence in his premiership where 148 Conservative MPs didn't have confidence in his leadership. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says now is the time to get behind the Prime Minister.
Well, we had a vote yesterday. The Prime Minister won a clear majority. It's time to draw a line, move forward and focus on what people want us to be talking about: housing, childcare, delivering on lower taxes.
The number of people using food banks has risen from 1 in 10 to nearly 1 in 6. The Food Standards Agency says 3/4 of people say the cost of food is a major concern. More than a fifth of those surveyed in March are skipping meals because they don't have enough money for food. The founder of the far-right group National Action has been jailed for 8.5 years. Alex Davies was found guilty last month of being a member of the organisation after it was banned in 2016. Rail bosses say the decision to scrap the connection between HS2 and the West Coast Main Line is hugely disappointing. The government announced it was axing the £3 billion Goulburn link 30 minutes before the outcome of last night's confidence vote. A joint statement from rail firms accuses the government of attempting to bury the news. Now, if you use an Apple phone, you will soon be able to edit and even unsend a text message in a new software update to be released later this year. The company have also announced an update to Apple Pay, which will allow people to split the cost of a purchase into multiple payments over a 6-week period. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.253 to the dollar. The pound is 1.172 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,477.33 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News, the briefing. It is coming up to 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radios. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, as we know, there was that vote yesterday for the Prime Minister. In the end, pretty tricky for Boris Johnson. Yes, he won. Yes, he remains as Conservative leader. And at the moment, it seems that he's got a bit of breathing space, with even some opponents suggesting that they need to draw a line under this. But be in no doubt that 148 of his own MPs saying they don't have confidence in his leadership is politically wounding. Just how wounding? Is it fatal? Can he survive in the medium to long term? Well, delighted to say, join me outside the House of Parliament is Lord Robert Haywards. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Just first of all, your reflections on yesterday, that vote, that sizeable rebellion. Was it bigger or larger than you had expected?
It's bigger than and I think the vast majority of people had expected. And therein lies the problem. It's a problem for Boris and it's a problem for the Tory party, but certainly bigger than most people had expected.
What did you hear when you spoke to kind of rebel MPs, or even just MPs across the party, about why it was so big? Because there is this discussion about whether it's personality or whether it's policy.
I think it is personality. Boris has led the party as a personality and has attracted lots of voters because of his personality. And it's now that his personality has become a liability. What's interesting when you talk to the rebels, or the MPs who didn't rebel, is that you've got such a disparate range of political views, all of whom coalesced yesterday to be into 148 dissenters.
So where do we go next? The Prime Minister saying we need to draw a line to that, and then, in theory, or in reality, he's got a point, i.e. he can't be challenged for the next year. Again, in theory, but also that people have to accept the result, don't they? I mean, that's kind of what Andrew Leadsom was suggesting today.
I think that's what one's seeing, is that people are drawing breath, people are saying we've had the vote, the message is there. Now, really, the ball is very firmly in Boris's court, because he has the opportunity to say, I hear what you say, it is personality driven, and I am going to have to change my approach. Whether he has the ability to do that is another matter. It's not in his character to do it, but he will need to do so. Otherwise, the drawing of breath, the hesitation from both sides will disappear, and we'll be back in a dispute both within the party and in relation to the Prime Minister.
And this is all, of course, against the backdrop of some pretty challenging moments ahead, those two by-elections, the Privileges Committee reports, and frankly, an economy that's going to get very, very tricky indeed.
Yes. But the economy is a matter for not just this country, but for the whole of Europe, possibly for the whole of the world. But there's no question, politics is about events. And many of those events are unforecasted. So we know the by-elections are coming, but there will be other hurdles which the Prime Minister, which this government have to face. And they are only going to be able to face them if they're with a reasonably quiescent and united party. We have it for a day, we have it for a few days possibly. But there's no question that Boris will have to sit on those members of the cabinet who are basically saying kneecap every rebel, get rid of every rebel. If he does that, he will guarantee that fury will come out immediately.
And just finally in all of this, though, isn't it the case, and I would make this case myself, is actually one of the reasons Boris Johnson won yesterday is because there's no obvious successor. This is not like Theresa May 3 or 4 years ago. And that hasn't changed given yesterday's vote. And that is maybe potentially what might sustain him. That the party can't unite behind anyone else.
There's always that as an argument. But if you are X% behind in the opinion polls, the argument that you don't change the leader when you're cross, furious, irritated by him, in the hope that somebody else might actually help you win the election, doesn't stand up. And there will be people who are making that judgment. Whatever the majority in their seats, they may say, well, actually, I might just have a better chance with X, whoever that X may happen to be.
But just finally on that point, is that when you look at the two by-elections coming up, the Conservatives could lose to Labour in the north and to the Liberal Democrats in the south, in the sense that the MPs, whoever takes over, I'm sure, as you've heard, Red Wallers would say, or some of them at least, Jeremy Hunt will not be able to hold on to my seat. Now, he might hold on to Tiverton, but he's not going to hold on to seats in the north of England, and vice versa.
You're absolutely right. But the question that many people will ask is that next leader, whoever it may happen to be, he or she, going to hold into either or neither or one or the other? And that will be the judgment that people will be making within the Tory party.
Lord Robert Hayward, thank you very much indeed for joining us outside Parliament, for your insight and analysis this afternoon. Really appreciate that. But what do the voters in Boris Johnson's constituency think? The constituency of Uxbridge in West London. He's been an MP there for the best part of a decade. The question is, do they still trust him? Our reporter Alice Porter has been to the constituency to find out.
has been a very safe Tory seat ever since it was created in 2010. And I think it's important to stress that even if the Prime Minister had lost last night's vote, he still would stay on as the MP for Uxbridge and Ruislip. But even amongst some of his most loyal supporters that I've been speaking to today, many of them have also been recognising that perhaps, given last night's votes with so many Tory rebels going against the Prime Minister, that perhaps his political days are numbered. This is what they said to me.
In the beginning, when he started, he was doing some good things, but now he's doing a lot of mistakes. And I think this COVID or this lockdown party was the last mistake for me. He should be, what's the word, dismissed.
I think it's very doubtful that he can survive this. I really do, because he, you know, there's too many voting against him for him to be a credible leader anymore. The party's obviously disunited at the moment. And
I think he let the country down, and at the time that everyone who stayed at home and they were trying to protect each other by isolating themselves, he was partying. And a lot of people, they say, okay, vaccination and everything, but that's not all. He just let people down completely because he was encouraging people not to go out, but at the same time he was partying. And it's just unbelievable.
So Boris Johnson's still got your vote?
Always. Always. If they try and get him out, I will not vote at all. I won't vote for Lib Dems, Green Party, Labour, definitely not Labour anyway, or even Tories then.
There were some people in Uxbridge who were speaking to me this morning. And so you've got quite a range of views there. But I think one thing that actually really struck me when I was speaking with quite a few of them is many supported Boris Johnson on a sort of national scale and support him as Prime Minister. But a lot of them were frustrated with him as a constituency MP. And I think some of that is down to the fact of the difficulties of when you have a Prime Minister who's also your local MP. And many of them sort of feel he's not involved with local issues, that he's not been to hustings, and quite frustrated with that. And I think that could be something that could come back to bite Boris Johnson in the ballot box. I mean, it's a couple of years until we've got a general election, so in some ways that very much goes in his favour given the events over the last 24 hours. But I think it's important to stress that speaking with the people here, it's important not to forget your local constituents, because it could come back to bite you in the ballot box.
That was Alice Porter there in the Prime Minister's West London constituency. What's the view in Scotland? We know, of course, many Scottish MSPs have asked for Boris Johnson to resign, or they certainly did earlier on this year. 4 out of 6 of the Scottish MPs, including the leader Douglas Ross, voted against the Prime Minister yesterday. Let's speak to Stephen Kerr. He's an MSP and joins us down the line from Edinburgh. Stephen, very good afternoon to you. Were you happy with yesterday's results?
Can you say that again, sorry?
Well, were you happy with yesterday's results?
Happy. I'm not very sure that is an emotion I can ascribe to the events of yesterday. I was surprised that so many MPs voted no confidence in the Prime Minister. But happy? No, I'm not happy. I mean, it's hardwired into the DNA of a Conservative, especially a Conservative elected member, to be loyal to the Prime Minister of the day, to the party leader, and these are not circumstances that can bring any Conservative any kind of satisfaction or joy at all, Darren.
You know that some rebels, some commentators are saying, Stephen, that in some ways the result yesterday was the worst of all worlds for the Conservative Party, in the sense that it is massively politically damaging for Boris Johnson, but not enough to force him out of office. Is that your kind of assessment, that the Conservative Party now finds itself with a leader who is massively politically wounded?
Well, there's no doubt the Prime Minister is politically damaged by this. It is true that it wasn't clear-cut in either way. We're kind of in a grey zone here where the Prime Minister neither has been overturned in terms of his leadership of the party by the votes of the MPs, or has a resounding victory. He certainly doesn't have a resounding victory. And that's why he now, and those who are closest to him in his circle of advisers, those who are in the Cabinet, need to think very carefully about what the message is from yesterday. The message clearly is there's a lot of deep-seated, widespread unhappiness with the Prime Minister's leadership. And I think it's very important as well, Darren, to differentiate between the leadership of the Prime Minister and Partygate and all of the reports of the last few months, and the actual performance of the government. The government are doing important things well for the country. They are, for example, the performance of the government in relation to supporting the Ukrainian people at this extraordinarily difficult time in their national story, or perhaps last week's package of measures to support families and individuals in relation to the cost of living crisis. These are all very important things that the government rightly should be focused on, and I think the government deserves support for what they're doing. But unfortunately, there is a shadow that is cast by the Prime Minister's leadership of the party, and that is what we are now living with the consequences of, and we saw that yesterday in the confidence vote.
Is it then that the Prime Minister, or is the calculation amongst kind of Scottish Conservatives, is that he is deeply unpopular in Scotland, and that's one of the reasons you think he needs to go? And if that is the case, who amongst the other 360 MPs, Conservative MPs here, would be more popular, do you reckon, in Scotland?
Well, the reality is, and I take no pleasure in saying this either, is that Boris Johnson is particularly unpopular in Scotland. The poll after poll has shown that his favourability ratings or his unfavourability ratings are extraordinarily high. There is no other political figure in recent history that is so unpopular in Scotland. So the truth is, we have had prime ministers in the past that have been unpopular. I think that is true, but they have been, shall I say, sellable to the Scottish people. And I think the problem we've got with Boris is that, unfortunately, it is proving very difficult to near impossible to sell Boris Johnson as a political figure to the Scottish electorate. That said, there is widespread recognition among Scottish voters that the Conservative government at Westminster is doing good things. So if you look at government policy in isolation from the personality of the leader, then there are approval ratings for the government in relation to, for example, the situation in Ukraine, going just the recent past, the government's response to the pandemic, the rollout of the vaccines, the support that was put in place for people through the pandemic, and of course the cost of living crisis as well. So these things, it's very complex, need to be separated out a bit more than perhaps the time we've got right now allow us to do. But it's true that the Prime Minister is particularly unpopular.
OK, Stephen Kerr in Edinburgh, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's turn now to Philip Blond, former advisor, of course, to David Cameron. Big thinker, a Conservative voice, and commentator. Philip, good afternoon to you. What did you make of yesterday's result? Where do we find ourselves politically, do you think, with the Conservative Party now?
Well, I think we find ourselves at a turning point, and if the Conservative Party does indeed move to remove Boris, we'll go back to a 1980s offer. I think what is most worrying is that the Conservative Party has not adopted to the political realignment that's taken place. What we now have is a Conservative Party that relies on the English working class largely for its majority. And we have a Conservative Party that's incapable of generating policy offers that help ameliorate or address the penalties of class in this country that remain the most pernicious source of inequality. And for all of his faults, the Prime Minister at least recognises that, and I believe, you know, in the levelling up agenda, attempts to speak to that. And indeed, if you look at where voters are in the north, they're the least likely to desert him. But where they are losing is in the old 1980s offer. So the people who benefited from the system as it was, the middle classes, those who live in the southeast, they're the ones who are deserting the Conservative Party. And what I think that we face is essentially a back to the future moment.
And isn't that, though, what supporters of the Prime Minister would say, is that at the end of the day, you know, the Prime Minister can still win people over. He still is an electoral asset, they would argue. And that, frankly, who else is there Philip, I keep saying this. Who could do a better job than Boris Johnson? That's what his supporters say.
Well, the two remarks, really. The tragedy of Boris Johnson is he has the right idea, but he's surrounded by the wrong people. Everyone around him, and now he's been made insecure, the people he has to appeal to, is a version of the 1980s deregulate, minimal state, low-tax Tories. Now, that helps people in the southeast. It'll help people like me. But it won't help people in the north. It won't help people who are suffering class penalties and have suffered them for generations, and whose children are going to go on and pay the highest price for being working class. The point is that he hasn't. He never developed an ideology. Boris never developed what Johnsonism might mean, and that to me is a tragedy, because what that means is we've had this realignment and nobody has developed the ideology that can speak to it. And anyone who replaces him in respect of serving working class people in this country, to my mind, would be worse, because they don't even acknowledge the problem, and all they're going to offer is a version of kind of Thatcherism 0.712.
Fascinating stuff, as always. Really good to get your insights this afternoon, Philip. Thank you very much indeed, Philip Blond there. Join us down the line. Thank you, Philip. OK, almost time for me to say goodbye here in Parliament. Coming up in just a couple of minutes is Colin Brazier, live from the studio. Colin, good afternoon to you. I assume you might be talking about politics a little bit too.
Well, look, you cover politics. I've had a heated conversation with my own conscience over the last hour or so about how much Boris we should do through the course of the next 2 hours. We get loads, as you know, Darren, we get bombarded with emails saying, you're obsessed, stop it. You mentioned in your show, is it about policy? Is it about personality? It's meant to be about personality. But what policies, what changes could Boris Johnson bring in that might persuade wavering voters and indeed wavering MPs to fall in behind him? We're also looking at Harry and Meghan. It's reported that the Queen didn't want to be pictured with Harry and Meghan when they had their little daughter Lilibet with them, for fear perhaps that may be leveraged or monetised by the Sussexes in some way. And also looking at the Isle of Man TT race. 236 riders have died since it started, 3 over the weekend. It's terribly sad, but I'm a great supporter. People, if they want to put themselves through great risk in pursuit of euphoria, let them do it. Darren.
Fascinating stuff. We'll be tuning in just a couple of minutes. Colin, thank you. That is it from me for today. Back again tomorrow at 3. We'll have reaction to a very fascinating PMQs. But from me, outside Parliament for now, goodbye, and we'll leave you with the weather on this Tuesday afternoon. See you soon.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Fine in the north today, but showers are starting to develop in the south, and overnight there'll be rain for many places away, that is from the far north, where a ridge of high pressure remains, but further south low pressure lurks. One just departing from the North Sea, one arriving for overnight. And that will bring some showery rain initially to the far southwest into the evening, and then that spreads into Northern Ireland, Wales, central and southern parts of England before arriving into northern England and southern Scotland overnight. A couple of hours of heavy and persistent rain in places, but for the southwest as well as Wales, it clears up by the end of the night. Of course, the cloud and the rain will allow temperatures to stay up 13 to 15 Celsius for most.